Hello everyone, my name is Hiro Song, and today we're going to talk about how to make bases for Sylvaneth models. My goal is to make really cool looking bases that don't use too many different materials. You can always add stuff to your bases, but if you're just starting out, this is some pretty cheap stuff that you should be able to get your hands on pretty easily. I'm going to be basing a Spirited Druthu today that's pretty much entirely unpainted, as well as 3 Kurnoth Hunters with greatswords that are completely painted. The first step is to make sure you have a reference of where your model is going to stand on your base. In my case, all of my models, including the unpainted Druthu, have been primed with the models stuck to the base. So because of this, there's an obvious paint line where the model will end up. If you don't have this, you can always use a pencil to mark your base. Now, we're going to start by using some corkboard to create some layers of ground. I got this technique from Vince Venturella, and the link is in the description to his video. We want to make sure that our corkboard will fit nicely onto the base, so you see me making sure that it will fit on the base and have a shape that I want here, nice and dry with no glue yet. I like to make sure things are looking good before gluing this down, and you can build the corkboard up in layers so that your model will appear taller on the table and so that your base has a little bit more definition on it. I'm going to keep peeling pieces of cork back until it has a shape that I want and just keep building it up like that. As you build your base, you can pull small pieces of the board off to create a more natural looking structure, or you can leave it harshly sticking out to create the look of rock formations. You can see I'm also saving my extra bits as I'm building the base, which we'll use in a bit, but it's great to keep these around. Because my Druthu is a centerpiece model and is supposed to be a huge menace, I want to make him super tall with 3 layers of corkboard. I got 4 square feet of corkboard on Amazon for around 20 bucks, and this stuff is probably going to last me a few hundred bases, so it's pretty cheap. Here you can see my 3 Kurnoth bases. I've made each of them a different height, so the first will stand directly on the base, the second will be 1 layer raised, and the captain will be 2 layers raised. This is to give a little bit of extra depth to the models when you're looking at them as a squad. Now I'm going to use some defined rocks that I got in an army painter kit that I got on Amazon for like 20 bucks. These are slightly larger rocks and they do a really good job of being a little bit rounded and showing the shape of a natural looking rock. Now it's time to add some rubble. I'm going to do this in a couple different ways, but first thing I'm going to do is make good use of the leftover bits of cork that we have lying around from making our actual base. I'm going to cover the base in glue in a couple different spots, namely right up against the edge of the different terrain, and I'm going to press some of these little bits of cork into it. This is going to make sure that the sections of cork don't look super harsh next to each other, so there's going to be a little bit of a softer decline in between them, and it's going to make it look a little bit more natural. And it's another great way to reuse your cork. I put a little dot of glue on top to make sure that they're nice and sealed in there, and there we go. We're going to have a little bit of rubble on our base. We're also going to use some small rocks that I got in the same army basing kit that I mentioned before, where I got the big rocks. These have a really nice texture, and again, if you have these on hand, that's great. If you don't, feel free to just do this step with the cork. Next, I'm going to use literal potting soil I got at the store for super cheap to add some more texture to the base. If you have a plant lover in your life, you probably already have some of this on hand, but if you don't, again, you can get it at a big box store really cheap. I put a piece of paper that I kind of rolled up at the edges to catch the extraneous pieces of dirt as I'm dropping the dirt onto the base. Now comes the part where things really start to look cool. Once everything is dry, I'm going to apply a very thick layer of Citadel Sterling mud. Other companies sell mud cheaper than this, so if you don't want to buy Citadel, you can buy something else. You can also just use cheap craft paint and add more of your potting soil to that for some more texture if you prefer that too. The most important part of this process is to ensure that there's thick buildup of mud at the edges of the terrain and the objects that are on top of the terrain. I use a toothpick to scoop out mud instead of a brush so that I can really goop it on the edges. It'll make things look more natural if you do this, so I recommend really focusing on this step. It does use a fair amount of the mud, but a pot of this from Citadel is like 8 bucks, and again, you can get it cheaper other places, so it definitely is the most expensive single thing I'm using on the base today, but I think it covers really well, and it gives a great look if you actually take the time and the energy to really goop it up along the edges of your model. Let me know if you have any other methods for this in the comment section. You'll want to let this dry overnight since the thick sections of mud take a long time to dry. The next few steps are going to add a ton of character to your bases. I'm going to take some gray paint and use a sort of dry brushing technique to get it onto the edges of the rocks on the base. It's good to be random and inconsistent here, since nature loves to cover things up with other things and debris and mud and all that, so there's no way to be wrong during this step. I'm going to do the exact same thing here with a few different brown colors as well, which will make it look like some different muds and things are going on in this forest. Again, nature is messy and there's no way to be wrong here. Similarly, I'll do the same thing with green to make it look like some moss is clinging to different parts of the base. The next part is optional, but since I have some nicely colored tiny pebbles from my Army Painter set that I mentioned before, I'm going to add a few of those to the base on top of the mud as well to add some more texture and also another color. Now we're going to wash our bases. This is where they go from looking good to looking great. I use dark washes all over the place to make sure the colors are blended and to make sure that everything is nicely muted. I don't want this base to actually take away from my paint job on the model, and the whole model is relatively muted to begin with because it is a big tree. They're all big trees, so I'd rather have it look a little bit more like a muted forest that they're standing on, rather than have the base be something super bright that's going to take away from the models. There's lots of washes out there, so really you can use whatever you feel comfortable with. For me, I use a whole bunch of different Citadel washes. Once that's dry, I'm going to come in with some of the same gray I used earlier for my rocks, and use something like a dry brushing motion to get it on there. I want good coverage, but I don't want it too thick, so I watered the paint down quite a bit in this step. I also use some Rhinox hide to define the logs I have on the ground to make sure that it's clear that they're wood debris and not something else. Now it's time for the really fun part. It's time to reattach our models to the base. You can see here that I'm going to use a dry fitting technique to make sure that the model actually has a place to stand and that it's going to end up exactly where I want it. There's a little bit of sediment from our basing work that's built up underneath where I want to attach this model, and that's not really a problem. I was pretty careful to try and leave the attach point open when I was basing it, but again, this is going to happen. You're being a little bit random and that's fine, so you can just use your scraper tool a little bit and sand it off. So since these guys have some predefined bases on their feet already, it's time to make sure the attachment point is smooth. I'll start by pushing some more Sterling mud up against the model to give it some more texture and make sure the smoothness of those bases won't show up on my model. I want it to appear nice and messy and rough, just like the rest of the base here. I'll apply my washes again and make sure that any unpainted base bits like this twig get painted. Now we're finally going to add some vegetation in the form of Army Painter basing tufts. It's important to make sure that your mini is fully painted and varnished before you do this, since small pieces of the tufts can get stuck in your paint or varnish and permanently give unwanted texture to your model. If you've chosen to base your mini before painting, this will be the point at which you call it done until your model is done being painted. For my part, I'm not going to base my Druthu with vegetation right now because he is far from painted. For my Kurnoth Hunters though, it's time to get green. So after they're varnished and the varnish has dried, they're all painted, all is done, I'm going to go ahead and grab some tufts off my sheet and place them on the edges or empty spaces that need a bit of definition on the base. I apply them with a dot of super glue, and I try to shape them a bit with my tweezers so that they don't look like they've been crushed in the plastic bag, which of course they have, but that's how we fix that problem. The final step is the edge of the base. This is my favorite part, and I like to leave it for the end so that it is the final part that ties everything together. I had to scrape a little bit of stuff off the edges so that it was smooth, but after a couple coats of slightly thinned Abaddon black paint, we are done. Thank you all very much for watching. This was a lot of fun to make. Let me know in the comments if this worked for you or if it didn't, and what worked and what didn't, and let me know if you have any other ideas for things that you use in your own bases that maybe I didn't mention here. I hope to be making more painting videos soon, so definitely stay tuned. I'm Hero Song, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.